Spect MP George Galloway and the journalist Peter Hitchens. Good morning.
Morning.
To you both.
Morning.
Let me start with you, George Galloway. Is the October Revolution a cause for celebration?
Well, if not for the October Revolution, we'd be conducting this interview in German. Although the truth is, this interview wouldn't be taking place and we probably wouldn't be alive for a variety of reasons. The Soviet Union broke the back of Hitler, as Mr. Churchill often opined in Parliament and elsewhere. If not for the Soviet Union, Hitler would have ruled, and his successors, perhaps until now, from Vladivostok all the way to Portugal.
But you say we wouldn't be able to have this discussion. In the former Soviet Union, we wouldn't be able to have a conversation like this either.
That's also true, but even the Sun
George will be able to say that in the former Soviet Union without any difficulty at all.
Even the Sun has spots on its face, as they used to say in the Soviet Union. There is no doubt, as your package just made clear, tremendous aberrations, big crimes, a lot of suffering. But if not for the transformation, then the Soviet Union, Russia's GDP increased by 850% in 10 years, from 1930 to 1940 in the Nazi occupation, and the strength that defeated Hitlerism would not have been there.
Peter Hitchens, does it offend you that there are people celebrating 100 years of the
Offend? No, but here's what you really wouldn't have been able to say in the Soviet Union in which I lived. You wouldn't have been able to say that it was set up by a cynical putsch, almost bloodless, but leading to an immense sea of blood, engineered by the German imperial government using Lenin as its agent, that there had already been a revolution in Russia in February of 1917, which had begun a process of turning Russia for the first time into a liberal democracy, that Lenin suppressed the results of the only fair election Russia ever had with military force because his party lost it, that this was the inauguration of an immensely long period of repression, brutality, secret police, concentration camps and lies, which I am delighted to have seen come to an end in my lifetime. And I cannot see why anybody looking at that disastrous country in which so much misery was needlessly imposed on so many people for so long could possibly celebrate the beginning of it, which was completely avoidable and, as I say, was purely the result of the cynical foreign policy and intelligence operations of the imperial German government trying to save its skin.
But everyone, including George Galloway, acknowledges the tyranny and the terror that followed. Well,
he gives us statistics about GDP, but fails to mention the hecatombs of people murdered
Peter's now
in labour
a 19th century conservative, but he was, of course, formerly a Trotskyite. He formerly sang the praises of Lenin, which I have not done today, nor ever. I've never been a communist, unlike Peter Hitchens. But I do acknowledge and celebrate that an entirely different world opened up as a result of the events in October 1917. China, you've just seen the party Congress decorated with the iconography of the Bolshevik Revolution, and China is the most powerful, or soon will be the most powerful country on the earth.
With one of the most repressive governments.
Well, it has. Well, I don't think that that's true. There is repression in China, but the
This is repression in China. There's enormous repression in China. Well, how could you possibly argue that there isn't?
China has taken more people out of poverty in the last 30 years than any country, any regime, any system ever has.
All despots always argue as they try and distract your attention from the mountains of skulls behind them to their supposed economic success, which generally doesn't turn out to be as great as claimed. Well, the Soviet Union was an enormous pile of rust by the time I lived there, and was a complete economic catastrophe as well as being.
That's why it fell down. Yeah.
Why do you? No,
that's why it fell down. But we're talking about the revolution.
Yes, because is it not possible to separate the two events? A popular overthrowing of the government is different, possibly, from the terror and the tyranny that followed, and one doesn't necessarily lead to the other.
There was no popular overthrow. This is a myth. You show this as Eisenstein propaganda as if it were true, as if it were fact. What you see is film made afterwards. What actually happened was a putsch in the middle of the night in which hardly anybody was involved.
A very esoteric point.
They're not esoteric at all. Nobody has even mentioned the Russian.
You're obsessed by that German connection, but not the one I opened.
No one's even mentioned.
You'd rather are more important?
No, they're both important. That no one's even mentioned during this year until now. There was a Russian Revolution. There were two. The first one was a genuine uprising, an overthrow of an autocracy, and I think we can all be glad of it. The second one was a cynical, foreign-financed putsch, and it doesn't deserve to be treated as if it were a popular uprising, or spoken of as if it was.
I mean, is that not true, that a Menshevik Russia might have done rather better than a Bolshevik one?
Well, it's kind of not my business, and it's entire counterfactual fiction. If I
unlike the thing with which you open this discussion.
Well, look, that's the most important thing. That if not for the Soviet Union, we wouldn't be here. Hitlerism might still command most of the world with its allies.
Possibly, but then again, if there had been no Bolshevik Revolution, there might well have been no Hitler as well. The effect of Bolshevism on international communism, and particularly on Europe, in the ensuing 20 years was colossal.
Well, look,
let's bring it all a little bit more up to date.
Okay.
You were saying earlier you've never been a Leninist, even though Peter Hitchens confesses that you were at one time.
I absolutely was a Trotskyist, and that's one of the reasons I now know of the complete folly of that political position.
There are senior members of the Labour Party, like John McDonnell, who says he's a Marxist, he's a Leninist openly. Is that a problem for the Labour Party?
I would have thought Marx was rather more popular and respected now than he's been for quite some time, as capitalism appears to collapse around our ears. From 2008, The Economist itself, the Bible of capitalism, began to resurrect Marxian economics and analysis. So I really don't think that it is. Jeremy Corbyn.
If there's one thing that can make our economic conditions worse, it would be a 5-year plan.
Well, it only took them 4, as I said. 5 for the years.
Whatever the alternative to our present conditions may be, it's not that.
Well, I think that we are moving into an era where governments, like the Chinese government, are making plans and are succeeding in implementing them, and thus transforming their position. China in 1949, I don't need to tell you, was just about the most backward place you could possibly imagine. And from 1949 to now, it has so transformed that it is the world's biggest economy and about to become the world's most important country.
We're in danger of getting distracted too much by China here. Peter, let me ask you this.
I have to put a point in here. If China was backward in 1949, it was far more backwards by the time Mao Zedong had finished his Great Leap Forward and deliberately starved millions of people to death in a period of economic lunacy.
But let's bring this back to the present day. What was interesting about what George was saying there, and a sense, certainly amongst younger voters in this country, and in others, where they are turning against capitalism, they don't think that it has worked or delivered for them, that this kind of Marxist-Leninist philosophy is becoming more popular?
Well, let's hope not. I mean, the fact that the current system is failing doesn't seem to me to recommend the Soviet system, which demonstrably failed, and which even its own leaders admitted had failed, which is why they tried and failed to reform it in the period when I was there, and that's when it completely collapsed. Whatever else you might want to conclude from examining our position, the Soviet alternative is not the thing you would want to choose. This was a long period of disaster, and I remember at the end of it watching in a Moscow cinema a film which has never been shown in the West, called Tak Žít nельзя, which means approximately "We Cannot Go On Living Like This," made by Stanislav Gavaryukin, which for the first time, by Politburo permission, told the truth about what life was like in that dreadful place, and everyone in that cinema was weeping, because finally they saw the truth being told about the dreadful anti-civilization in which they've been compelled to live for so long. And the idea that we should celebrate it or revive it seems to me to be verging on the obscene.
George, I mean, one interesting question about this, of course, is that whilst there are events going on in London and across the UK to mark this centenary, it's not being celebrated in Russia.
Well, I was in Russia a couple of weeks ago. There's a big debate about whether it ought to be, and there are many people celebrating it.
President Putin is not. I mean, he would very much like people to ignore it completely.
He's not. But the Communist Party is the second biggest party in Russia, and it is the ruling party in China, which is not a separate, with respect to you, Sarah, it's not a separate thing, because China is continuing the Russian Revolution and doing rather better at it than the Russians did. But there are many people, particularly older people, that's true, who think that the era of the Soviet Union was better than the very cold bath of capitalism that succeeded it. So half the world followed for a time the red flag, the red banner of Lenin. No one will do so again. Leninism, of the kind that Peter used to proselytize, is definitely not coming back. But Marxism is going to live on.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. We're out of
Let's
time.
hope
But thank you
not.
very much, gentlemen.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.